Crosby's mom says she wants you to know what really happened to her daughter. She was killed Tuesday morning on Porter Street in Northwest Charlotte. CMPD says Stephanie Alexander arrived home, found Crosby inside, and then shot her. Alexander is charged with voluntary manslaughter. WBTV's Cam Gaskins is live outside CMPD tonight. So Cam, what did Crosby's mom tell you?
Yeah, Molly, she wanted us to know that her daughter, Tyra Crosby, was not an intruder in Alexander's home and was actually invited inside by Alexander's husband.
I came home and I had seen a woman inside my house, and I pulled out my gun and shot her, and she's not moving. The 911 dispatcher fell silent for a moment. On the other end of the line, 53-year-old Stephanie Alexander stood in her living room, gun still warm in her hand, as the body of a young woman lay motionless on her floor. Welcome to Shadows of Crime. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join our community of truth seekers who demand justice for victims whose stories deserve to be told. Charlotte, North Carolina, July 18, 2023, 5 a.m. The darkness before dawn holds many secrets, but none as devastating as what happened inside a modest home on Porter Street that morning. A 25-year-old fashion entrepreneur with dreams of building her own clothing empire, a middle-aged woman returning unexpectedly to her residence, a husband with a dangerous secret, 3 lives about to collide in the most catastrophic way. "She killed my baby in cold blood," Tanya Hoskins would later tell reporters, her voice breaking as she clutched her daughter's photograph. She killed her at 4 a.m. and was out by 8 p.m., meaning that human life has no value. But what truly happened in those pre-dawn hours? The official story suggested a homeowner protecting her property from an intruder. The reality? Far more disturbing. As investigators would soon discover, the young victim's phone had been recording. An accidental call to her mother had captured everything. 8 minutes of audio that would change the entire direction of the case. It's about an 8-minute-long message of her being beat, tortured, Hoskins revealed. You can also hear them telling her that they were gonna kill her. What could drive someone to such violence? What words were exchanged in those final moments? And why was Tyra Crosby really in that house on Porter Street? The GPS on her phone would tell one story, the surveillance footage from an arcade on North Tryon Street would tell another, but it was what happened between those 2 locations that would reveal the most shocking truth of all. A truth that would leave you wondering, was this really about finding a stranger in your home, or something far more calculated? Before Tyra Crosby became a headline, before her name was spoken in courtrooms and whispered in shocked conversations across Charlotte, she was a young woman with boundless potential. At just 25, Tyra embodied the spirit of modern entrepreneurship. Her passion for fashion wasn't just a hobby, it was her calling. She had launched her own clothing line, transforming creative vision into tangible designs that reflected her unique perspective. Each piece told a story, much like Tyra herself. She was spontaneous, compassionate, and full of love, her mother, Tanya Hoskins, would later recall, eyes glistening with memories that now served as painful reminders of what was lost. My daughter deeply cared for those around her. The bond between Tyra and her mother transcended the typical parent-child relationship. They were confidants, best friends who shared hours-long phone conversations about everything and nothing. Dreams, disappointments, daily triumphs, all flowed freely between them. This connection would later prove crucial in ways neither could have imagined. Those who knew Tyra described a woman whose energy lit up rooms. Her creativity wasn't confined to fashion, it spilled into every aspect of her life. She approached challenges with innovative solutions and saw opportunities where others found obstacles. Charlotte's local business community had begun taking notice of the young entrepreneur whose designs captured attention and imagination. What made Tyra's approach to fashion distinctive was her emphasis on accessibility. She believed everyone deserved to feel beautiful, regardless of size, shape, or budget. This philosophy informed her business decisions and endeared her to a growing customer base who appreciated both her aesthetic and her values. Her social media accounts painted the picture of a life in motion: fashion sketches, fabric swatches, behind-the-scenes glimpses of photo shoots. Interspersed were moments of joy, dinners with friends, quiet evenings with a book, impromptu dance sessions in her studio. The timeline stopped abruptly on July 17, 2023, a final post showing color palettes for her upcoming collection. What Tyra couldn't have known was how the next few hours would unfold. How a chance encounter at an arcade would set in motion events that would extinguish all her potential, all her dreams. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of Tyra's story isn't just what she accomplished in her 25 years, but what remained undone. Now I'm left wondering who she might have become. As the sun set on July 17th, Tyra made a decision to go out for the evening. Like countless young adults on countless evenings, she was simply looking for connection, perhaps some fun after long hours of work. She couldn't have known that the man she would meet that night had secrets. Secrets that would prove fatal. The vibrant, ambitious woman who left her apartment that evening would never return. Instead, her legacy would be transformed into something she never could have anticipated, a cautionary tale about deception, jealousy, and the devastating consequences when truth remains hidden. The evening of July 17, 2023 began like any other summer night in Charlotte. The humidity hung thick in the air as Tyra Crosby stepped into an arcade on North Tryon Street. Security cameras would later capture these moments. Ordinary footage that would become extraordinary evidence in a murder investigation. What drew Tyra to this particular arcade remains unclear. Perhaps it was the nostalgic appeal of classic games, or simply a place to unwind after focusing on her fashion business all day. Whatever her reason, this decision placed her directly in the path of a man whose actions would ultimately lead to her death. The security footage shows Tyra laughing, moving between games, seemingly enjoying herself. At approximately 10:30 p.m., she begins conversing with an older man. This man, later identified as Stephanie Alexander's husband, appears animated in their conversation. Their interaction seems casual, friendly, nothing to suggest the tragedy that would unfold hours later. The surveillance video shows Crosby in an arcade on North Tryon Street with Alexander's husband, hours before her death. Tanya Hoskins would later tell investigators, her voice tight with anger and grief. This chance meeting, or perhaps not so chance, set the evening's fatal trajectory in motion. What wasn't captured on camera was their conversation. What promises were made, what invitation was extended. The man, significantly older than Tyra, old enough to be her father, as Hoskins would later point out, never mentioned one crucial detail. He was married, and the home he was inviting her to wasn't just his, but one he shared with his wife. As the arcade began closing around midnight, the pair exited together. Separate cars, separate paths, but a shared destination. The residence on Porter Street. GPS data from Tyra's phone would later confirm what her mother suspected. The GPS on her phone and her car states that she had only been to the residence one time. This wasn't a regular occurrence or ongoing affair. This was Tyra's first and only visit to the Alexander home. The drive from North Tryon Street to Porter Street takes approximately 15 minutes through Charlotte's nighttime streets. During this drive, did Tyra text anyone about her plans? Did she have any premonition about what awaited her? These questions remain unanswered, lost in the silence between arcade lights and doorbell chimes. What we do know is that sometime after midnight, Tyra arrived at the Porter Street address. The modest home gave no indication of the violence that would later unfold within its walls. Neighbors would later report seeing her car park outside. An unfamiliar vehicle on their quiet street, but not unusual enough to raise alarm. Inside, the man welcomed Tyra into what she believed was his home. The exact nature of their relationship, whether romantic or platonic, remains unclear. What is certain is that Tyra had no knowledge she was entering a married couple's residence, no awareness that Stephanie Alexander might return at any moment. The hours between Tyra's arrival and the confrontation remain largely unaccounted for. What conversations took place, what activities filled the time? The only certainty is that as the night deepened toward dawn, Stephanie Alexander was making her way home, unaware that her husband had invited a young woman into their shared space. In a cruel twist of timing, had Alexander returned home even an hour later, had Tyra left just 30 minutes earlier, the deadly confrontation might never have occurred. Instead, the clockwork of fate aligned with devastating precision. At approximately 4:00 a.m., headlights swept across the front of the Porter Street home as Stephanie Alexander's car pulled into the driveway. The sound of her key in the lock would have been unremarkable on any other night, but on this night, it was the opening note in a symphony of violence. As Alexander entered her home in those pre-dawn hours, she was about to discover what she perceived as the ultimate betrayal: her husband, another woman, her home, her territory violated. What happened in the moments immediately following her entry remains disputed. Did she confront them calmly at first? Did rage consume her instantly? The only certainty is that within minutes, Tyra Crosby would make a desperate phone call to her mother, a call that would capture the final, terrifying moments of her life. The moment Stephanie Alexander stepped through her front door at 4 a.m., the atmosphere inside the Porter Street residence transformed. What had been a casual, late-night encounter instantly became a powder keg of emotions, betrayal, rage, and fear colliding in the pre-dawn darkness. Alexander, 53, had not expected to find anyone in her home besides her husband. The sight of 25-year-old Tyra, young, beautiful, and clearly invited by her spouse, triggered an immediate and visceral reaction. According to court documents, Alexander didn't ask questions. She didn't demand explanations. Instead, she reached for her gun. What happened next was captured in an accidental phone call, a call that would later become the most damning piece of evidence in the case against Stephanie Alexander. At some point during the confrontation, Tyra had managed to dial her mother's number. Perhaps it was a desperate attempt to call for help, or maybe it was an inadvertent press of a speed dial button as the situation escalated. Whatever the reason, Tanya Hoskins' phone began recording a voicemail that would document the final 8 minutes of her daughter's life. It's about an 8-minute-long message of her being beat, tortured. Hoskins would later reveal, her voice breaking as she described the recording she could never unhear. You can also hear them telling her that they were gonna kill her. The recording, too disturbing for authorities to release publicly, reportedly captured the sounds of physical assault, Tyra's pleas, the voices of both Alexander and her husband, threats, impact sounds, and finally the gunshot that ended a young woman's life. This wasn't a split-second decision made in the heat of discovery. The 8-minute duration of the recording suggests a prolonged confrontation, time in which different choices could have been made, time in which a life could have been spared. During those 8 minutes, what was Alexander's husband doing? Court testimony suggests he was present throughout the confrontation but did nothing to prevent the escalation to violence. His inaction, his failure to intervene or de-escalate, would later become a point of contention among Tyra's family members, who believed he bore responsibility for creating the dangerous situation in the first place. I think that Tyra was very innocent in this situation, Hoskins insisted during interviews. She was invited to that home. I know my daughter wouldn't have went there knowing it was a married couple or that it was a wife's home. She was lured there by the man. The recording reveals another disturbing aspect of the confrontation, the apparent premeditation in Alexander's words. You can hear them telling her that they were going to kill her, suggests that the shooting wasn't merely a reaction to finding Tyra in her home. It was the culmination of minutes of threats and violence. Forensic analysis of the crime scene would later support this interpretation. The location of blood spatter, the positioning of furniture, and the trajectory of the bullet all told a story not of self-defense, but of execution. At approximately 4:08 a.m., according to the timestamp on the voicemail, a single gunshot rang out in the Porter Street home. The bullet struck Tyra in the chest, causing catastrophic damage to her heart and lungs. Death would have come within minutes, if not seconds. In the immediate aftermath, the recording captures sounds that investigators described as cleanup activities, movements, whispers, the closing of doors. Then, silence. It would be nearly an hour before Alexander called 911 at 5:00 a.m. to report the shooting. This gap, this hour of silence, would later become crucial to prosecutors building their case against her. When Alexander finally made the call, her voice was calm, controlled. "I came home and I had seen a woman inside my house and I pulled out my gun and shot, and she's not moving," she told the dispatcher. The narrative she presented was clear. She was a homeowner who had discovered an intruder and acted in self-defense. But the recording told a different story, a story of a young woman who realized too late that she had walked into a dangerous situation. A story of a confrontation that escalated from discovery to death. A story that contradicted Alexander's claim of an immediate reaction to finding a stranger in her home. By the time police arrived at the Porter Street address, Tyra Crosby had been dead for over an hour. Officers found her body in the living room, Alexander waiting calmly to surrender herself, and her husband nowhere to be found. The scene presented to investigators was carefully arranged, a narrative of home invasion and self-defense. But beneath this constructed scenario lay a more complex truth that would only emerge as detectives began to unravel the events of that fatal night. What Alexander couldn't have known was that Tyra's final call to her mother had captured everything: the threats, the assault, and most damning of all, the premeditated nature of the violence that ended a young woman's life. When CMPD officers arrived at the Porter Street residence at approximately 5:15 a.m., they encountered a scene that initially appeared straightforward. Stephanie Alexander met them at the door, composed and cooperative. Inside, the body of Tyra Crosby lay motionless in the living room. A single gunshot wound to the chest, no signs of forced entry. A handgun placed nearby. "Charlotte 911, do you need police, fire, or medic?" the recording begins. "I need police. Somebody just been shot in my house," Alexander responded, her voice steady. This call, later released to the public, would become the first piece in a puzzle that grew increasingly complex as investigators dug deeper. Alexander's initial statement to responding officers aligned with her 911 call. She had returned home, discovered an unknown woman in her house, and fired her weapon in self-defense. "I came home and I had seen a woman inside my house and I pulled out my gun and shot and she's not moving," Alexander told the dispatcher, presenting a narrative of a homeowner protecting her property from an intruder. The investigation took a dramatic turn the following day when Tanya Hoskins arrived at the police station. Devastated but determined, she handed over her phone containing a voicemail that would transform the case. "It's about an 8-minute-long message of her being beat, tortured," Hoskins revealed to authorities. "You can also hear them telling her that they were going to kill her." This recording directly contradicted Alexander's claim of an immediate defensive reaction upon finding a stranger in her home. Instead, it suggested a prolonged confrontation that escalated to fatal violence. "I want to know where you're watching from today. I'll ask you now. Drop your location in the comments below. Are you from Charlotte, where this happened? Or are you watching from somewhere else entirely? Your engagement helps this channel reach more people who care about justice. 6 hours after her arrest, while Tyra's body was still being examined by the medical examiner, Stephanie Alexander posted a $250,000 bond and walked free. This development shocked the community and devastated Tyra's family. "She killed my baby in cold blood," Hoskins told reporters outside the courthouse. "She killed her at 4 a.m. and she was out at 8 p.m., meaning that human life has no value." The initial charge of voluntary manslaughter reflected the prosecution's preliminary assessment based on Alexander's self-defense claim. Voluntary manslaughter typically applies when a killing occurs during a sudden quarrel or in the heat of passion, a lesser charge than murder, which requires malice aforethought. Criminal defense attorney Mark Jetton, though not involved in the case, explained to local media, "It certainly seems to be the charge that you would assume is correct. Now, the tricky part is, just because it's a heat of passion situation doesn't always mean manslaughter is the correct charge." As Alexander adjusted to life on bond, tensions in the community escalated. On July 27th, just 9 days after Tyra's death, CMPD responded to reports of gunshots at the Alexander residence. Someone had fired multiple rounds into the home. Though no one was injured, the incident highlighted the volatile emotions surrounding the case. Meanwhile, investigators continued gathering evidence. Surveillance footage from the arcade on North Tryon Street showed Tyra and Alexander's husband together hours before the shooting. This crucial piece of evidence undermined the narrative that Tyra was an unknown intruder. "I think that Tyra was very innocent in this situation," Hoskins stated. The GPS on her phone on her car states that she had only been to the residence one time. This digital evidence confirmed Tyra had traveled directly from the arcade to the Porter Street address, further supporting the family's claim that she had been invited to the home by Alexander's husband. As these details emerged, pressure mounted on the district attorney's office to reconsider the charges against Alexander. Tyra's family, led by the indefatigable Tanya Hoskins, began a public campaign demanding justice for her daughter. Family and friends gathered for a candlelight vigil to honor Tyra on Sunday, July 23rd.
No goodbyes today. The community coming together yesterday for a candlelight vigil to remember Tyra Crosby. CMPD says Stephanie Alexander came home and killed Crosby. Her family tells WCNC Charlotte she was invited over by the husband. Wake Up Charlotte's Richard Defame joins us now, and Richard, Alexander now out of jail on bond.
That is correct, and as she's out of jail on bond awaiting her trial for voluntary manslaughter, the family and friends of Miss Crosby are remembering her life, not the way it ended, but the life she lived.
The community came together to remember the vibrant 25-year-old whose life had been cut short. A celebration of life was held the following day at Greater Temple Baptist Church in Charlotte, where hundreds gathered to pay their respects. Throughout this period, Hoskins remained steadfast in her pursuit of justice, convinced that the recording of her daughter's final moments would be the key to ensuring Alexander faced appropriate charges for Tyra's death. This wasn't manslaughter, Hoskins insisted during the community vigil held for Tyra, and we won't rest until the charges reflect what truly happened to my daughter. The legal machinery began turning slowly in the weeks following Tyra Crosby's death. While Stephanie Alexander remained free on bond, the district attorney's office faced mounting pressure to reevaluate the charges against her. The voluntary manslaughter charge initially filed seemed increasingly inadequate as new evidence came to light. In a pivotal development that shifted the trajectory of the case, the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office presented evidence to a grand jury in late summer 2023. This included the damning 8-minute recording that captured Tyra's final moments, evidence that Tanya Hoskins had fought to ensure would be heard. The grand jury's decision was unanimous and significant. Stephanie Alexander would face indictment on second-degree murder charges. This elevated charge reflected the prosecution's assessment that Alexander's actions demonstrated malice, a critical legal distinction from the heat-of-passion defense typically associated with manslaughter. A Mecklenburg County grand jury has indicted a woman for second-degree murder in the shooting death of a Charlotte woman found inside her home in Northwest Charlotte, read the official statement from the district attorney's office. The announcement brought a measure of validation to Tyra's family, who had insisted from the beginning that her death was not a spontaneous act but a deliberate killing. The upgraded charges carried substantially higher potential penalties. While voluntary manslaughter in North Carolina typically results in sentences of 3 to 7 years, second-degree murder convictions can bring 12 to 40 years in prison, a reflection of the greater culpability associated with malicious intent. Alexander's defense team immediately challenged the new indictment, filing motions to dismiss the murder charge and reinstate the original manslaughter charge. They argued that regardless of the recording's content, the case fundamentally involved a woman discovering another woman in her home with her husband, a classic heat-of-passion scenario. Court proceedings revealed the defense's strategy: portray Alexander as a wronged wife who reacted to extreme provocation. They emphasized her clean criminal record and standing in the community, suggesting the incident was an aberration in an otherwise law-abiding life. "I don't feel that justice will be served," Hoskins predicted during a pre-trial interview. I know that if she's in her right mind, she'll take a plea. That plea may not give her much time. As the case moved toward trial, scheduled for December 5, 2023, both prosecution and defense teams engaged in intense preparation. Prosecutors built their case around the recording, the timeline discrepancies, and evidence suggesting Tyra had been invited to the home. The defense focused on Alexander's state of mind upon discovering her husband with another woman in their marital home. Legal experts following the case noted its complexity. "The recording changes everything," commented a former prosecutor not affiliated with the case. "Without it, this might have remained a manslaughter case. With it, prosecutors can argue premeditation and deliberation, elements that elevate the crime significantly." The courtroom became a battleground not just of legal arguments but of competing narratives. Was this a story about a homeowner defending her territory, or about a calculated act of violence against an innocent young woman? Was Alexander a victim of her husband's betrayal who snapped in a moment of emotional turmoil? Or was she a calculating killer who deliberately took a life? As the trial date approached, tensions between the families escalated. Security measures at the courthouse were enhanced after several confrontations during preliminary hearings. The case had touched a nerve in the Charlotte community, raising questions about self-defense, infidelity, and justice. Throughout the proceedings, Tyra's mother remained a constant presence, attending every hearing with quiet dignity. "I'm here for my daughter," she told reporters outside the courthouse. "She can't speak for herself anymore, so I have to be her voice." The stage was set for a December showdown that would determine whether Stephanie Alexander would face decades in prison or walk away with a significantly lighter sentence for what her defense team continued to characterize as a crime of passion. At the center of the prosecution's case against Stephanie Alexander stood one piece of evidence more powerful than any witness testimony or forensic analysis: an 8-minute voicemail that captured Tyra Crosby's final moments alive. This accidental recording, the result of Tyra's desperate attempt to reach her mother during the confrontation, transformed what might have remained a case of disputed self-defense into something far more disturbing. Though never released to the public due to its graphic nature, those who heard it described its contents as profoundly disturbing. It's about an 8-minute-long message of her being beat, tortured, Tanya Hoskins explained, her voice breaking as she recalled first hearing her daughter's final moments. You can also hear them telling her that they were going to kill her. The recording began at approximately 4:00 a.m. on July 18, 2023. According to those familiar with its contents, it captured voices identified as both Stephanie Alexander and her husband.
Cell phone captured her daughter's final moments. 25-year-old Tyra Crosby was killed early Tuesday morning at a home in Northwest Charlotte. CMPD charged Stephanie Alexander with voluntary manslaughter in this case. She bonded out of jail just hours later. WCCB Charlotte's Trish Williford is live in Uptown. And Trish, the victim's family wants the suspect to be charged with murder, right?
Yeah, Morgan, they also want her back behind bars tonight. The victim's mother walks us through what she believes led to her daughter's death.
I am missing her.
As she was being attacked at the home, she says a voicemail message captured her daughter's final moments.
It's about an 8-minute long message of her being beat, tortured. You can also hear them telling her that they're going to kill her.
Hoskins would not allow us to hear that recording, but says she sent it to investigators. Alexander was given a $250,000 bond. Daniel Redford with Charmec FOP believes that's too low.
This is an open door policy that we have in Mecklenburg County. So it sends the message to criminals that, hey, I can go out here and I can do something, and I'm going to go to jail and, maybe be able to take a shower and get a sandwich. I'm going to be right back out on the street again because nothing's going to happen.
This directly contradicted Alexander's initial claim to dispatchers that she had simply reacted to finding an intruder in her home. Prosecutors built their timeline meticulously around this recording. The timestamp showed Tyra was shot at approximately 4:08 a.m., yet Alexander didn't call 911 until nearly 5:00 a.m. a 52-minute gap during which no medical assistance was sought for the dying woman. The medical examiner's report offered physical evidence supporting the recording's account of events. Tyra's body showed defensive wounds and bruising consistent with a physical altercation prior to the shooting, injuries that aligned with the sounds of struggle captured in the voicemail. Ballistics analysis determined that the fatal shot had been fired from a distance of several feet, not during a close-quarters struggle. This finding further contradicted the narrative of an immediate defensive reaction. As these pieces of evidence came together, they painted a picture not of a homeowner surprised by an intruder, but of a confrontation that escalated to fatal violence over several minutes, time during which different choices could have been made. In court, testimony revealed that Alexander came home early from her job because she needed a computer for a class assignment. She told detectives she saw clothes on the couch and asked who was in the house before grabbing her gun. She told police that her husband tried to grab the gun from her and she pulled it back. When she saw the bathroom door open, she shot and thought she was aiming at the wall. For the prosecution, the recording represented irrefutable evidence of malice aforethought, the critical element distinguishing murder from manslaughter. For Tyra's family, it was both a blessing and a curse, vital evidence that might bring justice, but also a permanent record of their loved one's suffering. "No mother should ever have to hear what I heard," Hoskins said during a pre-trial interview. "But if that recording is what it takes to get justice for my daughter, then I'll listen to it every day in court if I have to." The courtroom fell silent as Stephanie Alexander rose to address the judge in December 2023. After months of legal maneuvering, she had accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to voluntary manslaughter rather than facing trial for second-degree murder. "I want to apologize to the family," Alexander said, her voice barely audible as she turned toward the rows where Tyra's relatives sat. "I never meant for any of this to happen." For Tanya Hoskins, these words rang hollow. Too little, too late for the daughter whose life had been cut short at 25. The plea agreement meant Alexander would serve a minimum of 5 years in prison, far less than the decades she might have faced if convicted of murder. The sentencing hearing itself became a flashpoint of raw emotion. As Alexander offered her apology, tension that had been building for months erupted. A scuffle broke out between Alexander's husband, the man whose actions had set these tragic events in motion, and a member of Tyra's family. Court officers rushed to separate them as the judge called for order, a chaotic scene that underscored how deeply this case had wounded both families. Before I share my final thoughts on this tragic case, I'd like to ask, what do you think about the sentence Stephanie Alexander received? Was justice served with a 5-year minimum sentence, or do you believe she deserved more time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For the Charlotte community, the case had raised uncomfortable questions about domestic violence, jealousy, and the legal system's handling of crimes of passion. Some saw Alexander's sentence as appropriate for a woman who had discovered another woman with her husband in their home. Others viewed it as a troubling message about the value placed on Tyra's young life. 5 years for taking a life, Hoskins said outside the courthouse after sentencing. "The system failed my daughter today." The plea deal meant that the 8-minute recording, the evidence that had elevated the charges to murder, would never be played in open court. This spared both families from reliving Tyra's final moments in public, but also meant that the full truth of what happened in those pre-dawn hours would remain known only to those who had heard the recording. Alexander's husband, whose name had largely remained out of media coverage, faced no criminal charges for his role in the events. His decision to invite Tyra to the marital home without disclosing his marriage status had created the volatile situation, yet legally he bore no responsibility for the violence that followed. For Tyra's fashion business, dreams died with her. The clothing line she had worked so hard to establish would never reach its potential. Friends from the local design community held a memorial fashion show in her honor, showcasing pieces from her final collection, a bittersweet tribute to talent cut short. The case left lasting impacts beyond the immediate families. In Charlotte's legal community, it became a reference point in discussions about how to charge cases involving domestic situations and self-defense claims. The role of the recording in elevating the charges highlighted how technology has changed criminal investigations and prosecutions. For Tanya Hoskins, the conclusion of the legal proceedings marked not an end but a transition to a different kind of fight. She established a foundation in Tyra's name focused on relationship transparency and violence prevention, turning her grief into action that might prevent similar tragedies. "My daughter's death was preventable," Hoskins explained at the foundation's launch. "If there had been honesty about that man's marriage, if there had been a different choice made when anger took over, Tyra would still be here today." The story of Tyra Crosby serves as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, how a chance meeting at an arcade can lead to tragedy, how secrets and lies can escalate to violence, how 8 minutes can forever alter multiple lives. For those who followed the case, it offered sobering lessons: the importance of transparency in relationships, the dangers of jealousy and rage, and the irreversible consequences of split-second decisions made in moments of high emotion. As Stephanie Alexander began serving her sentence in early 2024, two families continued the difficult process of rebuilding lives shattered by the events of July 18, 2023. For one, there was the prospect of eventual reunion. For the other, only memories remained of a vibrant young woman whose potential would never be realized, whose life ended not because of any choice she made, but because she trusted someone who wasn't worthy of that trust.